Good evening, my fellow YouTubers. Well, here we go. The final one of my videos on the existence of God arguments. And I've left what I consider to be the weaker argument to last, because it's not going to take me a whole video to take this one and analyse it. So I figured I would do a concluding set of remarks at the end of this one to just tie up the trilogy neatly. The last argument of the major trinity, it's always interesting these religious things happen in trinities, is the ontological argument. Now the ontological argument, very, very rough form, states that if you can conceive of a supreme and eternal being that is perfect in every way, then he must by nature of logic exist. Because if he does not exist, that would create some kind of inherent logical fallacy, because if he did not exist, then he would not be perfect. I'll just repeat that. If he does not exist, he could not be perfect. Therefore, your conception of a supreme perfect being must imply existence as a prerequisite for that deity. Now, to me, this is, as I said before, this is the weakest of the arguments, and it doesn't take a very long amount of time before you realise that this is an argument that has switched the word truth and existence with the word concept. Because what this argument can prove is that the concept of a perfect supreme deity that controls the universe is indeed logically plausible. But then, to put it in another context, unicorns are logically plausible. We can all conceive of a horse with a horn on its head, you know. But just because you can conceive of something does not make that reality. It's a false twist. It's like saying, you know, you can't have a supreme being without having existence. You know, Descartes put it in the way of, you can't have mountains without having valleys as well. Well, of course, you can't have a mountain without having a valley. That, you know, what goes up must come down, logically follows. But when we're talking in the realms of a supreme creator, I want a little bit more than just a word game on this one. I want a bit more than just this logical step, because all we're doing here is proving the concept. We can observe mountains and valleys. At best, you can say about this argument is that if God were to exist, he must exist. You can't necessarily prove a God purely from this argument alone. It's, to me, like I say, look, I've only spent about 3 minutes talking, and I've already pretty much shown the biggest flaw it has. That and the fact that it's circular reasoning. God must exist. Why? Because he's perfect. Why? Because he's God. Circle. You'll never find any sort of concrete reasoning within that argument. And that's why, even more than the cosmological, and definitely more than the teleological, I'm willing to throw the ontological argument onto the dustbin. I don't find any validity to it whatsoever. So, in conclusion, I think the thing I've discovered most looking at these arguments is that they are all pretty much arguments on design, and that they all have their strengths and they all have massive weaknesses. You know, the ontological argument is strong in that you can understand logically where it's trying to go, but then it has holes you could drive a truck through. The cosmological argument makes logical sense if you follow it far back enough, but it makes a lot of assumptions and it takes a massive jump in conclusion towards the end. And the teleological argument, it's intricate, it makes sense, it's very convincing. At least to me, it's one of the very few reasons I'm still potentially an agnostic and possibly a deist with that agnosticism. But even I will admit the universe is not ordered, and the teleological argument was made when the universe was considered a mechanical thing like a clock or a watch. But I think the thing that you miss here, and as much as atheists around the world have destroyed these arguments, and done so very convincingly, much better than I have done here, probably, they're not destroying the argument on it. They're destroying an argument on design, because all you're ever doing is implying that there was a creator. And that's fine, destroy that, because it can't be proved at the moment. You cannot prove that with current knowledge that we have. I don't think any of these arguments necessarily disproves a God. It merely disproves God as sole creator of everything. I think it disproves certain parts of the God myth. I think it disproves the fact that God would watch over all of us and God would be the designer of everything intricately in design. I don't think you can ever say that that happened. I think the theory of evolution is probably the best description of how life started on this earth. If we want to get into abiogenesis and cosmology, those aren't my fields. I did law, so I'm not going to start getting into that. But from a philosophical standpoint, these arguments only disprove creator. They don't disprove God. So, the concept is still out there, but I don't think you can use these arguments. More importantly, if people are going to be religious, I don't think these three arguments were the ones that brought them to the faith. I think it was their own personal experiences and their own personal feelings on the issue, possibly some sort of spiritual experience that led them to it, not opposed to these logical word games and sort of little mental exercises that people have come up with for years and have been struck down in equal measure. This is ElPresidenteTel, ladies and gentlemen. May reason and logic guide us on YouTube.